Hey guys, this is Mike Roberts, the Converse Cowboy Podcast. We're on a road trip through Texas right now. We've got some interviews lined up for the rest of the week. Our first stop was with Dick Pieper, a good friend of mine and one of the best horsemen in the world today, owner of Playgun. We sit down and talk about horsemanship. We talk about what it takes to be successful. He's been in this business for over 60 years, so to have a successful career, with longevity. He talks about mindset, philosophy as it relates to horses and life, and enjoy the show.
So you want to bring the horse in now, or?
Yeah, can we bring the horse?
Stephen asked if we were going to have a horse in the stall while we were doing the interview. I was like, we could, yeah, but
might wreck a little equipment.
yeah, that's what I said. Yeah, we've got to.
Mike said, you said I would rather us both be sitting on horses.
Yeah, no equipment left. Dick may not be left. I may not be left.
Yes,
so.
That's right.
Dick's last interview.
Yeah.
That's exactly
Ended
right.
abruptly.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, I am Mike Roberts. This is the Converse Cowboy, sitting down today with the legend, Dick Pieper. There is so much that I want to get to. I was planning on doing this with no notes, but on second thought, I started looking. I'm like, there's no way. So, from Playgun to Texas Kicker to the clinics that you do, you've definitely built a hell of a name for yourself. And I guess I'd like to go back to what started all of that. When did you get your start in the horse world?
Well, my family always had horses. I had an uncle that was a very successful standard bred trainer. We had saddle horses at home for as long as I could remember. I got my first pony when I was 4 years old, and by 4.5 or 5, I was pretty hooked. And it's just kind of gone on from there.
Yeah.
My parents wanted me to be a veterinarian and kind of insisted that I go to Ohio State and try to get in vet school. And then my second year in undergraduate school, my dad had a pretty serious stroke, and I had to work to put myself through school, and so I kind of abandoned the veterinary end of it because they had 600 applicants to vet school and accepted about 60. So it was tough to get in, and especially tough to get in if you weren't pretty well funded. So I got an undergraduate degree in animal science, and then immediately went into the Navy. And interestingly enough, I trained horses while I was in college. It was my best part-time job that I ever had. I had an old mare at the Ohio State Fairgrounds, and I just missed the horses so much. I'd go out there and ride her every day and feed her a couple times a day, and most of the time I had to walk out there and back and forth, but it was okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't that far. So anyway, somebody asked me, boy, your horse rides pretty good. My horse only takes one lead and won't back up. What would you charge me to ride that horse for a little while and kind of get it fixed? Oh, I don't even remember what I charge now, $200 or $300 a month.
Mm-hmm.
They fed it and everything like that. So, and that I rode that one, and then they told somebody that I did a good job, and somebody else came along, and before you knew it, I had 8 or 10 horses in training all the time up at the fairgrounds there, and it was a good part-time job because if I had to study, I just didn't ride, and if I had a little time, I did ride, and I kept them all rode and got them all fixed, and they're pretty easy to fix because they were just old kind of plug horses that just had to get them to respond to a few cues, and they were pretty much okay, and everybody was happy. So it was a good part-time job. Then I got in the Navy, And first weekend I got assigned to the Philadelphia Naval Hospital, and I was a hospital corpsman. And first weekend I was there, I hitchhiked up to Harrisburg because I heard there was a horse sale up there. And I met a couple from New Jersey, and they had Appaloosas, and they needed a horse trainer, and so I started working for them and trained horses, part-time the whole time I was in the Navy. And
how old were you?
I was 25 or 26, something like
Okay.
that at that time. And then I got out of the Navy and came back home and hung out my shingle, and I've been doing it ever since.
Very interesting. So it sounds like you had a passion for horses from a very early age.
Well, I really did, and I tried to learn everything I could about Western horses, and at that time there wasn't a whole lot of information out there,
Right.
Have you ever heard of the Will James books?
I have not.
Well, Will James was a cowboy author that he was a Montana cowboy, but he was a really good writer, and he wrote in the language that he used. So he didn't use very precise English or anything like that. But boy, he was an artist and also an author, and he did an incredible job. I mean, you could read his books and you could just see the action. You could just see the horses, and then you'd see some of the drawings that he made in his books, and those books had a big impact on me.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a lot about riding horses and training horses from old Will James just from reading all those books, and I started reading them when I was, first grade.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so it was. I had a lot of passion and enjoyed it a lot, and boy, I was really bullheaded and determined too.
Yeah. It takes that sometimes. We spoke about this last night over dinner. Can you talk about what drew you to the reining and then into the cutting? How did you get into those
Well,
worlds?
I was in college, and I took 2 or 3 horse production courses.
Okay.
And one of in the course of taking one of those courses, we took a field trip up to Dale Wilkinson's training stable in Findlay, Ohio. And I was in school at Ohio State. So we went up there, and I watched Dale ride 2 or 3 reining horses. And then they ran some cattle in, and he worked a couple cutting horses. And I was hooked. I mean, I was so hooked, and so determined from that day on. That's what I was going to do for a living.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, like I said, I guess you got to be kind of dumb to be as hooked as I was, but I was pretty hooked. I just.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Can you talk about, so early on, how did you know that was what you wanted to do, or did you? Did you?
I pretty much knew I knew that generally I wanted to be in the horse business. I wanted to be able to train horses, and that was but it was kind of a vague thing until I went up to Dale's and saw somebody that was really good at what they did,
Mm-hmm.
and it was very clear cut.
Yeah.
From that time on.
Okay. What can you talk about? I'm interested to hear about the progression for sure, and we'll get into that. But early on, what were some of the habits, routines that you did with those horses on a daily basis?
Well, I rode every horse every day, 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And I lived on a little old farm in southern Ohio, and it was up on top of a hill called Gobbler's Knob.
Mm-hmm.
And I was up on top of that hill, and we had a good bit of land up there, and I converted an old tobacco barn into a horse barn, built a bunch of stalls in there, and I rode horses, and those were kind of poor days, but it was my determined. I guess the biggest asset that I had was that I was just so determined that I was going to do this and I was going to be successful at it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of horses in the early days. I taught a lot of wrong things to, and taught them a lot of things that were eventually detrimental to their longevity and to their, being able to be shown and that sort of thing. But I kind of learned from my mistake. And I would go up to Dale's. I got to be friends with him after the clinic. I went up there and introduced myself, and then he was a nice guy, and he took the time to try to help me as much as he could, and so it was pretty interesting. One time I had an old horse, and I was trying to make a reining horse out of him, and I wasn't being very successful, and so I took him up to Dale's, and I'm riding him around. Every time Dale would ride past me, he'd say, "Ask him and don't hurt him." And then he'd ride past me again, he'd say, "Ask him and don't hurt him." I was there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and the only things that he said to me was, "Ask him and don't hurt him." Well, about 6 weeks later, I went back up to Dale's again. I said, "Dale," I said, "I've been doing just what you said. I've been asking this horse and not hurting him, and asking him and not hurting him, and asking him and not hurting him." And I said, "He's not getting any better. In fact, I think he's getting worse." And he says, "Well, you little son of a bitch, don't you think it's about time you hurt him?" So I learned a lot from Dale.
Yeah.
Learned a lot of things.
Yeah.
And another person that was really a mentor of mine was Bob Anthony.
Okay.
And he was the trainer at Willowbrook Farms, which was a position that I eventually held. But I would go up there, and I'd ride with Bob a lot, and Bob explained a lot of things to me, told me a lot of things, and he was really instrumental in developing the type of psychology that I use today. He was a guy that was very much ahead of his time, and he was an excellent horse trainer.
Yeah. I think that's a very good segue into mentors and how important you think that is when training horses, whether it be young horses or performance horses, having that person who has been there and done that, such as yourself, to be able to reach out to. Because I know for me, whenever I was struggling and pulling on these things, I didn't know what in the hell I was doing, and I know a lot of other people feel the same way. So can you talk about that a little bit, as far as how important is it to have that person that you can go to and ask questions versus trying to figure this thing out by yourself?
I think it's vitally important.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's vitally important. I would go to Bob Anthony's place, and I would stay at his house. His wife would cook 3 meals a day for me, and I would ride with him for a full day, or at least I would ride with him the amount of time that Bob rode. He was not a guy to ride. He had a good job and a good position there, and several people working for him, and he was not a guy that rode a whole lot of horses every day. He might ride 2 or 3 and spend a lot of time on them and that sort of thing. But anyway, I spent a lot of time with him, and he was very helpful and reached out to me and was very, very good to me as far as helping me along the way. And Dale was actually the same, and none of those guys ever charged me a penny. And so I feel like it's kind of my duty to pass that knowledge on. Anybody that comes to my place that wants to be a professional trainer and they're struggling, and I know that they're struggling financially, I don't charge them anything for helping them. I try to pass it on down, the same way it was given to me.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know you were a godsend for me, whenever I bought that Playgun gelding, and I had no idea what I was doing. People around me in my small world didn't know what they were doing, and I couldn't get the answers for them, and so that's when I reached out to you. Not really, I wasn't really even seeking lessons, but I did. I bought the Language of Horsemanship book that you wrote. I bought the DVDs, and really liked the message that you were delivering because it was very simple, very easy to understand, and so that resonated, and for that I'm grateful. And then being able to come meet with you and ride with you, and those 10 hours, I would drive 10 hours to come just spend a few days with you, and the knowledge that I gained from those those few days each time is really, it's invaluable. So,
well, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
No,
I really appreciate that. It's nice of you to say.
Yeah.
But I think that it's I think that when you learn something and you keep it a secret, kind of dies within you, and it doesn't. But if you pass it on to somebody, then they take that knowledge and they expand on it, and maybe in a later on conversation they share that expansion with you, and the knowledge becomes greater, and the whole horse business benefits, and the individuals that benefit the most are the horses, because there's less wear and tear, there's less frustration. I think when people start whipping on horses and beating on horses and spurring on horses and stuff like that, and not that I don't use my spurs, because I certainly do, but I use them as a tool rather than as a weapon.
Right.
And a lot of people weaponize bridles and all that sort of thing out of frustration because they don't have the knowledge.
Yeah, lack of understanding.
Absolutely. And so the more that we share that knowledge, and the more we are able to communicate that knowledge to a lot of people, the better off the horses are, and certainly the better off the people are, and everything benefits. The horse shows benefit everything.
Yeah. So you've been doing this, over 60 plus years now?
I think that I've been doing it professionally for 67 years.
So my question is, doing something for that long, you and I have had this conversation before, but continuing to evolve, continuing to grow that knowledge, how have you been able to change what you do or alter what you do in a way, I guess, to progress that knowledge or to better yourself?
Well, I think first thing you have to do, you have to constantly strive to be very open-minded. You have to be able to accept. I used to go to the fraternity, and I'd work my horses, and then I'd spend hours sitting up there in the stands watching other people ride and other people train their horses. And from that, you can learn. If you keep your mind open, you can learn a lot of things. You can learn things to do, and you can certainly learn things not to do.
Yeah.
And if there was something in question, or something, guy was doing something and I didn't really understand what he was doing, I would make it a point to write his name down and the horse's name, and then I would, get the draw sheet, and I would make it a point to go and watch him show that horse the next day. And pretty soon you can figure out if it worked or if it didn't work.
Yeah.
And, and you have to you can't ever say, well, okay, I've won the fraternity, or I've done really well at this cutting, or done really well here. And so I know everything, and there's no, I just know it all. The minute you start thinking that way, your career drops like a rock. I mean, it hits bottom now.
Yeah.
So you have to constantly be open-minded because training horses and showing horses is a very competitive sport, extremely competitive, and so you've got to be really sharp, and it's always evolving.
Yeah.
There's always people that are figuring out new ways to do things that are better than the old ways.
Yeah. I asked you on one of those nights we were sitting around in the living room drinking whiskey, I asked if you could say in one word the reason why you've been so successful, what that is. I don't know if you remember this conversation, but the word was perseverance. So can you talk about that a little bit and what that means to you and how that has led to your success?
In the early days, I never had any horses that were winners. I was struggling along, learning how to train horses. I didn't have any money, and there was times I'd eat oatmeal 3 times a day, and it was everything was difficult. I didn't have an indoor arena, and if it rained, I couldn't ride. And but I had a lot of perseverance. I stayed with it. I hung in there. I was confident that I was capable of being a really good horse trainer. Just kind of needed to learn how to do it and needed to keep working at it and that sort of thing. And I just I can honestly tell you that I never, ever doubted that I was going to be successful someday. And, I knew it might take a year, it might take 5 years, might take 10 years, might take 20 years, but someday it was going to work out.
Yeah, and you were okay with that.
And I was okay with that, yeah.
I just trust that process.
Yep, and that's kind of what you have to do. And I'm talking about amateurs, non-pros, everybody that gets in the horse business. You have to develop. Everybody learns technique a long time before they learn feel. And technique means that you know how to do something, and feel means you know how hard to pick up that rein, how hard to squeeze with that leg, how to get the reaction that you
and when to do it,
and when to quit.
Yeah,
and sometimes the quitting place is the most important of the whole process.
Another segue into something else you've said. I think it's on your DVD, or it may have just been a conversation we had. But tell the story about. Because I think you're right, and people may want to rush the process, and whatever it may be horsemanship, it may be just something in life, but trust the process and be willing to do it as long as it takes to get to where you want to be. But the 1%.
Oh, yeah.
The 1% story, I think, is really cool. Can you talk about that?
Yes, sir. When I had a customer from California, and she was a very wealthy lady, had a lot of horses. One time she had 10 horses in training with me. And so I had the occasion to go out to California and take her horses to some shows out there. So I went to, 2 or 3 shows, and then there was 5 or 6 days in between, and then I went to a couple more shows. So I worked those horses pretty hard, and I was going to give them a few days off, and I wasn't going to ride there for a couple of days. And she said, "Well, what do you want to do, while you're out here?" She says, "I can loan you a car. You can go down to she lived really Santa Monica, and you can go down. You can go down on Rodeo Drive and have dinner, whatever you want to do. I can just." Or she said, "You can go to the beach," or she said, "I might be able to get you." I used to ride with Jimmy Williams. I might call Jimmy and see if you could go over there and watch him ride, or maybe ride something over there. So I said, that's what I want to do. Because Jimmy Williams was a very famous West Coast horseman, and he rode everything. He rode hunters and jumpers and English horses and Western horses and stock horses and reiners and cutters, and he just rode everything. Mm-hmm. Had a big following. He was very successful. So I went over there, and Jimmy and I kind of hit it off. And he put me on a horse, and we rode around and visited and talked, and he was really a nice guy. He was very open and very, very good.
How old were you at this point?
I was probably 30, 31, okay. something like that. And he says, do you think that you can improve your horses at the rate of 1% a day? I said, oh, yeah, shoot, yeah. I said, I think I can even do better than that. Well, he said, you're going way too fast then. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, he said, if you could improve them at 1% a day, in 100 days, they'd be fully trained and they'd be perfect. And he said, everybody knows it takes 2 years.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was about an inch tall. But
a good lesson, right?
It was a great lesson. Yeah. It was a great lesson. And every time after that, even to this day, if I push a horse just a little bit, I think, whoa, let's back off a little bit, you know. And I think horses kind of people learn on kind of a upwards incline, but I think horses learn almost in a stair-step type of pattern. You teach them something, and they go along kind of at a level deal, and they don't get better, and they don't get better, and you're trying, and then all of a sudden, whoop, they jump up, and just one day, for no apparent reason, they get a lot better. Mm-hmm. And then they go along on a plane for a while. And so I think that's an important thing to remember. Yeah. And if you ride a horse, and he's the same way he was yesterday, it was a good day. Mm-hmm. It was a good day.
That's a very good lesson, and one that I refer back to a lot. And whenever I get frustrated with something, and it may be outside of horsemanship, and I remember that it's like it's okay. It's okay if it takes time. And to not beat myself up about it because I'm not learning something as fast as I would like to. And
sure, and the big thing with horses is you never let them have a bad day. And that is the secret, and I've discovered that to be true more and more and more and more as I train 3-year-olds for the reining fraternity and that sort of thing. I mean, from the first day that you saddle them and get on them, you just have so many days until you got to ride them in the pen and compete for, $150,000 purse or $150,000 first prize.
Right.
So you just have so many days. So if you can just avoid getting in big fights with them, and if you can avoid periods where they're lame or they're off a little bit to where you can't ride them, and if you can keep their mind, pure and keep those horses happy throughout that training period, if they don't get any better on a daily basis, that is just fine, as long as they don't get worse.
Right.
If they get worse, you're in trouble.
Right. How have so if you are, I'm sure there's times where you've been unclear, maybe unfocused, maybe in a rut. Is there anything that you do to maybe pull yourself out of that? Like for me, I like to journal, I like to meditate. If I get unclear, I may do a fast. But is there anything for you that you do to regain that focus?
Well, I kind of do the same thing. I like to, if I see that I am starting to get in a little bit of a rut, I just sit down and I think about it, and I think, look, you're training your horses a little bit on automatic pilot rather than thinking about each horse. And that got me in the habit. and it's a habit that I still have to this day. I cannot go to sleep at night until I have thought about every horse that I rode that day before, how they reacted, and what kind of a plan I'm going to have when I ride that horse the next day. Are they okay? Are they doing all right? Are they kind of hitting a plateau where they're not getting any better? What can I do to improve them? Should I just ride them through this little plateau and with the knowledge that they are going to get better? But you got to have a plan. When you get on that horse, you can't just go out there and ride it around. I know there's a lot of people that do that, but you can't just go out there and ride it around and hope that it gets better. You have to have a plan. You have to think about that horse, because they're a living, breathing animal. They're not like a motorcycle.
Yeah.
You know,
I've heard Phil Rapp say, "Hope is not a strategy."
Yeah, that is very true.
Yeah.
That's a great quote.
Yeah. Who are some go-tos for you now? Nowadays, if you're thinking about something or maybe something new, do you have people that you call, or if so?
Yeah,
who?
I have people that I go and visit and talk to and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of people that I respect that think about their horses the same way that I do. And I have a lot of compassion for horses, because I've learned that there's no way to you can't beat them into doing it, and you can't, you have to just systematically train this horse. And so there's a lot of people that James Payne is a really good person that I like to talk to. I was his mentor. He worked for me for 10 years. You learn a lot of things, and he's a really smart guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to talk to him about horses. And you mentioned Phil Rapp, and Phil Rapp's a good guy to talk to about horses. And maybe one of the best ones is Bill Riddle, because Bill Riddle is he is a very smart guy, and he's a really, really good guy.
Sorry, man. How cold is it? I feel like it's not that cold, or I shouldn't be acting like this, but dude, my hands are so cold.
Your hands are cold. Your hands are cold. So.
Yeah, I'm
Can't turn my pages.
it's a little chilly, but I'm okay.
Get a little fire going here in a minute.
Yeah, we just get a little wood and put it right there. That'd be pretty nice, actually.
What is a hobby, something that people may not know that you do, that you like to do?
Well, I belong to an organization called the American Mountain Men.
Okay.
And the American Mountain Men, there are several different organizations that try to portray the people that took part in the fur trade. But the American Mountain Men is absolutely the hardcore organization. And by hardcore, I mean everything that we do, everything that we take with us, everything that we use is exactly the way it was back prior to 1840. And so we wear buckskins, but it can't be commercial tan buckskins. It has to be brain tan buckskins. And we sleep with Hudson Bay blankets, and we ride period correct saddles, period correct bridles, period correct bits. If we build a fire, we build it with a flint and steel. If we don't eat anything, take anything with us, there's no form of refrigeration or anything like that. We ride a period saddle and lead a pack horse, and the pack saddle on the pack horse is period correct. and everything's just exactly the way it was prior to 1840.
How long have you been doing that now?
Oh, 12, 15 years,
Okay.
something like that. I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it, and it's kind of a neat thing because you get your basic outfit and you say, well, I got everything I need now, and you go out there and all of a sudden you see some guy and he's got a really cool knife. And you say, where'd you get that knife? Well, so and so made it for me, cost me $300, and I'm gonna order one of them.
Yeah.
So my point is you're constantly improving your outfit. You're constantly getting into it, and the ride is beautiful. We usually ride about 150 miles through the mountains.
Which takes how long?
It's any of if they have a rendezvous, and we ride into the rendezvous.
Okay.
And the rendezvous can be anywhere. It's in the Rocky Mountains. It can be in Idaho. It can be Utah. It can be Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, northern New Mexico, and parts of California.
Very cool. Very cool. When's the next trip? When are you going again?
We usually leave about middle June and get back around the 4th of July.
Okay. I got you.
So,
Very cool. What let's get into the one and only Playgun. Let's talk a little bit about him, and we can go back to the I know a lot of folks may know the story of how you acquired him, but I'd like to hear your version of it again.
Well, Brenda is an excellent horsewoman. I mean, she's a good judge, and used to judge a lot of NRHA ratings and stuff like that. And she was a good judge, and she was a really good judge of conformation. And she and I constantly studied conformation and bloodlines, and we talked about things like that a lot. And we talked a lot about form to function, how correct conformation defines the way a horse is able to move and be able to do things. So, and we would go to sales, every sale in Fort Worth, and I would get a catalog and she would get a catalog, and she'd go one direction, I would go the other direction. And then after each of us had looked at every horse that was in the sale, we would meet, and the horses that both of us had marked, then we would go back and look at them again together and discuss the horse and discuss what we thought the horse was worth and what we thought we could pay for it and that sort of thing. And then we'd go and bid on the horse. So the day Playgun was in the sale, we followed that same rule, and when we both had looked at the horses and we were walking toward each other, both of us said it exactly the same thing. Did you see that gray colt out of Miss Silver Pistol? And he was he was long-haired, he was pot-bellied, he was not really fit to be in the sale, but boy, you talk about a correct conformation, big pretty eye, great head, great neck. I mean, we just looked at him and looked at him and looked at him together. We couldn't find anything wrong with him.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked to Wes Shahan that owned him, and Wes told us if he didn't get $30,000 for him, he was going to pass him out and take him back home. So Playgun came in the ring, and I started bidding on him, and Brenda said, well, we haven't got $30,000 to spend. And she said, what are you bidding on him for? And I said, well, I said, he might change his mind and sell him a little cheaper, something like that. I said, you never know. Don't hurt to have the last bid. And anyway, to make a long story short, I think he had told a lot of people that he was going to take him home if he didn't get that much for him, and he didn't really look the part because he was long-haired and he was kind of pot-bellied and, just wasn't in great condition to go to the sale. So when he came in the ring, I think a lot of people went up to get a hamburger, and we ended up buying him for $13,500, and they brought the ticket up, and I signed the ticket, and he was our horse. So that was a very fortuitous thing, because there was a pretty one of the top horsemen in the cutting horse business called me up later on, and when he was about a 6-year-old, and wanted me to put a price on him, and I said, well, we really don't want to sell him, and he said, well, if just tell me an outlandish price. You would tell me a price that you would take for him, and it can be pretty high because my buyer is pretty stout. And I said, well, I'd have to talk to Brenda about that. And he said, I'll tell you quite frankly, my people will spend up to $10 million. And I said, well, I'll have to talk to Brenda about that. So hung up the phone, and I said, Brenda, I've got some people that'll give us $10 million for Playgun. Well, she said, that's a lot of money. She said, I guess you could sell him. She said, I guess if we sold him, we might as well sell all our mares, because we'll never get another horse like him. And she said, if we sell all the mares, I guess you might as well just sell the ranch. She said, if we sell the ranch, she says, I guess we could go out to California or somewhere and buy a really great condo on the beach. And she says, how long do you think you'd last in a condo on the beach? I said, all right, you made your point.
So there really wasn't, 10 million is a lot. So there was no price that you would have taken for him.
That horse is the only horse I've ever been around that, and I owned him for 24 of his 25 years, and never in that period of time did he ever say no.
Yeah. So you get this long-haired, pot-bellied colt back to your place. He looks great on paper. By Freckles Playboy out of Miss Silver Pistol, who's won over 500,000.
513,000.
At what point did you realize, okay, I may have something here?
Well, I had a Mexican boy that worked for me, and he worked for me almost 10 years, and started every 2-year-old that we had, and some of them bucked a lot, and some of them didn't buck at all, but the only horse that he ever got bucked off of was Playgun. And he got on Playgun, and he rode him around, and all of a sudden he just broke in two and started bucking, and Tony was on the ground. And he just got up, got back on him, and the horse never bucked again, ever.
Right.
But anyway, we knew he was very athletic, and Tony rode him for about a month, and then I started riding him, and I rode him about another month, and I started him on cattle. And the second time that I started him on cattle, he just, that cow turned around and looked at him, and he just fell down on his belly and trembled and shook and didn't know where to go, but he just got lower and lower, and all of a sudden his belly almost touched the ground, and I thought, this is a pretty cowy horse, and
yeah.
We knew he was athletic, so that's the big thing right there. A good one they've got to be really cowy, and they've got to be extremely athletic, and so we just went ahead with him and got him trained, and there were lots of days when we didn't have very good cows, and back in that time we'd buy 20 cows instead of buying a load, and we started buying loads of cattle later on, but he didn't have the best conditions to get trained, but he always made progress, and he just he never took a backward step.
How was that for you transitioning from a reining background to the cutting?
Well, I was fortunate in the respect that as I guess, as you know, my first really introduction to the kind of horses I wanted to train was when we took that field trip up to Dale Wilkinson's.
Right.
And Dale rode, 3 or 4 reiners, and he rode, a couple cutters, worked them on cattle. And so I guess economically, there was really no way that I could just start out in the cutting horse business. So I started out in the reining horse business, and I kind of always jokingly told people that I always rode reiners, just to acquire enough money that I could afford to be in the cutting horse business. So that's kind of what happened. And I had cutters, several times in the past, and during that period while we lived at Marietta, I would buy. I'd go to a cutting and I'd watch somebody, and their horse wouldn't work very good, or the horse might run off or something like that, and I thought, I think I could fix that, and I'd talk to them, and hey, you want to sell that horse? I sure do, and you'd buy it for a little bit of nothing, and I'd ride it for 2 or 3 months, and work it on cows a little bit, and kind of get it going, and take it to another cutting, and do pretty well with it. And somebody'd say, I'd like to buy that horse, and so I'd sell it. Maybe I wouldn't have one for 2 or 3 months, and then find another one. So I kind of piddled in it a little bit prior to having Playgun. So I had a little bit of knowledge about the cutting. I sure didn't know anywhere near what I know today, but I was learning all the time, and
Right.
and I had a pretty good student in old Playgun.
Yeah. And that's a good point. A lot of times they teach us, right?
Yes, exactly right. When somebody kind of goes along and they're a little mediocre, and all of a sudden they just jump up and start winning big stuff, it's not because they had such a huge flash of brilliance. It's just that they found a really good horse.
Yeah. Can you talk about, when I first rode that Playgun gelding, I noticed a difference with him versus any other horse that I'd ever ridden. He was just more explosive, and the strength that he had, and I've heard you and Jody Gallion talk about it through Playgun's promo, but can you talk about the feeling that the feeling you had whenever you would ride him and whenever he would get sure enough locked on a cow?
Oh, it was just a fantastic feeling. He was a really powerful horse, and he was so intent on his job. And if you got a running cow, he could run with that cow, and he could stop, and he could turn around. He was extremely athletic and extremely explosive. I mean, he really wanted to do his job, wanted to do his job well. One time, I was at a cutting, and Jody wasn't there. I had got Bill Freeman to hold herd, sit in the corner for me, and I had a new saddle. I had the saddle that I had won at Augusta, and it had big silver corner plates, and it was really pretty saddle, and it had a kind of a post dally horn. It was kind of a ranch cutter type of saddle. So I went in there on old Playgun, and I cut a cow, and it was a hard running, really fast cow, and I'd been riding a saddle that had a one of those kind of slim, narrow horns that you wrap your hand around and hold on, kind of put your thumb on top. And this saddle, because of the way the horn was made, you had to put your hand on top. And I could ride a horse pretty good, so I wasn't just like gripping the top, you know. Boy, Playgun ran over there, and I mean, he stuck it in the ground. And my hand went right off that horn. And I kind of leaned forward, and then I pressed down on the other stirrup, and I got back on, got a hold of the horn, you know, got right back with him again and everything. Bill Freeman thought that was the funniest thing he'd ever seen in his life. So he is over there, he's holding herd for me. You know, I'm doing good in the cutting.
Yeah.
And he's holding herd, and he's doing a good job, but he's just dying laughing. He's just...
That's funny. Can you talk about, you know, we talk about successes, and that's when people really get noticed, is when they're successful. They don't, you know, outside looking in, people don't always see the challenges or the failure or perceived failures that we go through. And I know you talked about struggling early on, but is there anything where you may have been trying to achieve something or trying to do something and it didn't work out just how you thought? And I say perceived failure because I don't believe anything is a failure per se. You know, we can always learn from these things, but is there any time that stands out in your mind?
Well, yeah, there's lots of times.
Yeah.
There's lots of times. You know, you have a really good horse. Yeah, you're going to go to the reining fraternity. You got a really good horse. You think that that's a horse that you can win the fraternity on. And you go there and you maybe make the finals. And in the finals, this horse can really spin fast, and you go out there and you spin 5 times instead of 4 times, and you go off pattern. And that's a real failure. And it's a real failure on your part because you were the one. It wasn't the horse's fault. It was your fault that you failed. And so those are failures that were hard for me to take. You know, if the horse did something that that caused you to not achieve success, I always felt like that well, it was I didn't train him quite well enough, or maybe he had a little hole somewhere that I didn't see before, or something like that, and I just kind of say, well, we'll do better next year, that sort of thing. And I didn't worry. But if it was my fault, that bothered me quite a bit, and it should, because you're not supposed to. You're supposed to do pretty good. You're not supposed to let that horse down.
So how do you get through that, though, and how do you not necessarily judge yourself and really learn from that experience?
You have to be, and I think this is true, if you're going to be in the horse business, you have to be an eternal optimist. And, you've got to be that way, and I'm kind of that way naturally. And so, I might beat myself up for a couple days, and then I might just say, well, hell with thinking like that, and I'm going to go back to training horses and train one better next year.
Yeah.
Just you can allow yourself a couple days to really beat yourself up, and then you just got to say, get over it. Let's go to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
It sounds like you had a very good head on your shoulders from early on, but knowing what you know now, if you could go back in time and give that 25-year-old Dick Pieper any advice, what advice would that be?
Work harder and do better.
It sounded like you worked pretty hard, though.
I did work hard. But you can always work a little harder, and you can always do a little better, and you always be a little smarter.
And I think that's a very good point, because no matter, yeah, you're right, because no matter what we do, we can do our best, strive to do our best. We can always do better. And we're never going to be
the person that we want to be, and that's
right.
okay.
That's exactly right, and it is okay. But you can do better every day. You can do better every time. You can work a little longer. You can work a little harder. You can use your head more. You can think more.
Yeah.
And that's probably the most important thing. I'm not a superb athlete or anything like that. I mean, I ride a horse pretty good, but I think that my success was more from the way I thought things through and the way I got into a horse's brain was the secret of my success, much more than how much of an athlete I am.
Right.
Right.
And proof of that is in the book you wrote with the language of horsemanship, which is just filled with knowledge. And I keep that book on my desk at home, and I'll highlight something I like, in books that I read. Well, damn near the whole book is yellow. It's just one page after another, and what led you to that point? Writing a book is not an easy task, and I don't know from experience, but that's what I have heard. So what led you to do that, take on that challenge?
Well, there was a lady that's a very good friend of mine. Her name was Cheryl Megatow, and she got married again, and I'm not sure what her name is now, but last name, I know it, but it escapes me at the moment. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Cheryl and I started writing this book a long time ago. And she was my inspiration because she said, you got to write a book, you got to write a book, you got to write a book. And she was a freelance writer for a lot of magazines and a freelance photographer. So, and there was a lot of magazines that wanted me to do articles. And so she was there because she lived in Oklahoma and close by. She got the job of coming to my place a number of times and interviewing me for magazine articles, and she kept saying, "We've got to write a book, and I'll help you write it and everything." So we would start writing this book, and we would work on it every day for a month, and then she would have to go someplace, or I would have to go someplace, or something would come up that interrupted the pattern of us getting together and working on the book, and we might not get back to it for 6 months. And then she'd come back and we'd work on it a couple of weeks, and then one of us would have something to do, and the pattern would get broken, and it might be 8 months. So we were probably 5 years writing the book. But fortunately, we got it finished, got it over with, and it was and I tried to write the book, and maybe it was good that we wrote it over such a long period of time, because even though we weren't in the process of writing the book, I thought a lot about the subject matter. Mm-hmm. And that probably was a good thing.
Yeah. Perseverance.
Yep. That's my watchword.
Yeah. So Einstein has a quote, and it says, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough."
I think that's very true.
And so you have this innate ability to explain these things very simply. So there's no doubt you have a very good understanding of what you're doing and what you're teaching. Where does that come from?
Well, my mother was a school teacher. One of my first cousins was a teacher. She had two daughters. Both of them became teachers. And everyone in my family that taught school was an outstanding teacher. I mean, they weren't just, they were every school, every principal, every person that came in contact with them said, "Wow, that person can really explain things." So I think it's just kind of a genetic thing that makes it easy for me to explain things.
I got you. That's a cool skill to have, because a lot of folks, there's a lot of good horsemen out there, good cutters out there, good reiners. Not everybody has the ability to share that knowledge
Yeah.
in an easy to understand way.
I know a lot of trainers that are very, very good, excellent trainers, but they just don't, and maybe they just don't want to take the time to delve into it. You know, I mean, when we decided to write a book, I decided very early on that it was either going to be a really good book or I didn't want to really have anything to do with it much, you know.
Yeah.
And so it was. I had a lot of desire to make it a good book, and then, you know, when you're explaining things to people, if you can explain it clearly to where people can understand it, you don't have to do it once. If you're not clear and they don't understand it, you're going to have to repeat it 900 times, and you still may not get the point across.
Right.
So, you know, I make a conscious effort to try to explain things well.
Yeah. This is going to be a weird question, and I'm kind of bouncing all over the place, but I'm going to come back to Playgun and ask a very similar question to one I asked you earlier. But if Playgun were still alive and he could talk, what advice do you think he would give with the knowledge and expertise he had to younger horses going down that same path?
I think he would say, be honest and try hard and don't say no. You know, be cooperative.
Yeah.
He was a very easy horse to train.
Yeah.
You showed him things, and you showed him things 3 or 4 times, and he had it. You know, he because he wanted to do it.
Yeah.
You know, there's horses that you kind of have to force into, not necessarily force into doing things, but you got to repeat it over and over and over and over and over, because they don't really want to do it that to start with very much. But he wanted to do it. He had a desire to work cattle.
Yeah.
He had a lot of cow.
Yeah.
And somebody told me one time, if you bored a hole in his head, there'd just be thousands of little cows come running out of there.
If you could put any mare with Playgun, what is your idea of a perfect breeding?
Well, that would be a question on your questions. Kind of sounds like it's on bloodlines, but I think one thing that is essential when you're breeding mares, they have to be really good conformation mares.
Okay.
And I think that conformation and breeding really go hand in hand to make a really good horse. We always strived to breed mares that had some record, cutting record. And we always strived to breed mares that had really good bloodlines.
Mm-hmm.
And
You said to me before, you always want to breed like to like.
exactly. And that's the third really important factor, is you have like conformation to like conformation. And people used to come to my barn, and I'd lead old Playgun out, and I'd stand him up in the aisle, you know, and they'd walk around him and they'd look at him and they'd say, boy, he's got a really nice long neck. And he'll help my mare because she's got kind of a short neck. And the next guy would come, and I'd lead Playgun out and stand him up, and he'd say, boy, he sure got a big old hip, you know. That's the only hole in my mare. She hasn't got much hip. So he'll really help her. And that might work 1 out of 4 times or 1 out of 5 times or something like that. But mares that really ring the bell to where you have a good baby every single year are mares that look conformation-wise just like Playgun. They got the same kind of bone. They got the same kind of, you know, basically good conformation. You know, all overall, and then those babies are going to come out. If you've got a group of mares that look just like him, you're going to have a group of babies that just look like pigs out of the same litter.
Right.
You know, and that's what we want.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. So there's not a specific one.
Well,
cat mare.
I love cat mares. I like Bob Baker Dock mares. You know, that mare that is the mother of PG Heavily Armed is a Bob Baker Dock mare, and she was a really good mare because she ended up being NCHA Horse of the Year one year. You know, before we bought her, and bred her, and PG Heavily Armed is probably the leading son of Playgun. So that was a really good cross. But she was a great conformation mare. She was a little smaller than Playgun, but other than that, looked just like them.
Yeah.
You know, so the pattern holds true.
Right.
You know.
Savvy information. Man.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
How did you come up with the name Playgun? I love all the names of these horses, but how did you come up with that name? Or was that
He was
already named?
He was already
How did
named.
you come up with the names of your horses, though?
Well, the actually, my wife Brenda did most of that. She named most of them, and she was pretty inventive. A lot of them we called PG something, you know, and so everybody got to know if a horse had a prefix of PG before its name, that it was a son or a daughter of Playgun. Like Brenda's horse is PG Heavily Armed, and we try to get the theme of a gun or something like that, and there was a PG 6-shooter and a PG, you know, lots of different gun-related names.
It's a cool name, right?
Yeah, it is.
Playgun's a cool name.
It is a really cool name. Really cool name.
Very good branding.
Yep.
Any other questions from the audience?
I definitely wanted to know, when you talked about the 150-mile ride through the mountains.
Yes, sir.
How long did that take you?
5 days usually.
5 days.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think we got to the specific.
Yeah.
You didn't listen to my question good enough.
Well,
'Cause I asked that.
actually,
You did. And I think we got on to something good, but I didn't get like a specific.
Oh.
yeah.
How many times?
Well, you know, I mean, it would kind of depend on the country too. If it was really up and down steep, and one time we rode 100 miles from to Creede, Colorado, from Durango, and we had to cross the Continental Divide 3 times. That took like almost 7 days, and it was boy, that was the toughest ride I ever went on. Very, very tough ride.
Well, man, I'm sure we could sit here for a few more hours, but unless we start a fire, I don't know if I'm going to make it. But I want to end with some rapid fire questions, okay?
Sounds good.
You can answer these in 1 to 2 words, and I'm just going to roll to the next one.
Okay.
All right? Favorite Western?
John Wayne in The Searchers.
Okay. Favorite bit maker?
Billy Clapper.
Billy Clapper. Horse color. Favorite horse color?
Gray.
Is there a book that you've gifted most, or do you have a favorite book?
I have a lot of really, really favorite books, but probably the book that influenced my life more than any one would be Will James' book Smokey.
Smokey. Okay. You and I share this. What is your favorite whiskey?
Buffalo Trace.
Buffalo Trace bourbon.
Yes, sir.
Okay, my last question, and you can elaborate on this. What is the name of this show is the Converse Cowboy. So everybody I sit down with, the last question is, what is your definition of a cowboy?
My definition of a cowboy is someone, it can be a cutter, or it can be someone that works on a ranch, is up way before daylight, rides a horse to do everything that he does, works in sub-zero weather or 110-degree weather, or sometimes he goes without drinking water for a pretty good ways. Sometimes he has to miss lunch. And someone that is very caring and compassionate about the livestock that he comes in contact with, whether it be horses or cattle.
Perfect. Where, so you've got the book. Where can people find out more? I know you're still doing clinics. You got the DVDs out.
Yep.
Available on Amazon,
Yep.
I'm assuming.
Yep.
Or do you have any clinics coming up anytime soon?
Well, I've got one that I'm talking about. It's not totally confirmed yet. In Florida,
Okay.
around Gainesville, Florida,
Okay.
and I've kind of dropped out of the clinic picture for a couple of years, and I want to get back into that.
Okay.
And I'm going to contact the people that do all the horse fairs around the country. At one time, one year I did the one at the California State Fairgrounds at Sacramento. I did one in at the Indiana State Fairgrounds at a horse fair. I did one at the Illinois State Fairgrounds. I did one. They have one called the Equine Affair in Columbus, Ohio. I did one in Michigan. I did one in Wisconsin, and they were all good. They were all good.
Stuff.
I enjoyed doing those, and a lot of people there, big crowds. It was good and a lot of fun, and that leads to a lot of private clinics around the country as
Yep.
well. So that's kind of my plan for not necessarily this year because it's a little too late, but next year I plan to do a number of those.
Well, that's great. And for those folks who can't, may not be able to make it to a clinic or maybe not have the funds to do a private clinic, I highly recommend the book, The Language of Horsemanship. I highly recommend both DVDs, The Basics and The Maneuvers. They're just, I can't speak highly enough about them. So, Dick, I appreciate you sitting down. I'm very grateful, very humble to have you on the show. And most definitely we'll have you back for a second time.
Well, I thank you very much for having me on the show. It was great. It was a great conversation. It's just like probably the only thing that this conversation is lacking is a little whiskey.
We'll do that post show.
Okay.
Good stuff.